invested in other innovations that may come up. The government's just not going to be responsible for those. The government is generally not a responsive institution, whereas private investors are, because they're constantly looking for new ways to innovate.
Okay, so would you guys like to ask?
I had a quick question. I wanted to hone on to at the beginning, which I thought was interesting. I think that there's sort of this conception from the side that climate change is a hoax, right? Okay, so if there's a hoax, you would assume there's a reason behind it. So be it whether this like cavil of liberals up in the sky led by George Soros deciding, that might be one of them.
I don't think so.
But the other one is, this premise that sort of climate scientists have a lot at stake here. Al Gore has a lot at stake here. He's going to get rich when we pass the bill. Great, that all sounds great. But I guess sort of something that's always been a little bit confusing to me is like I've been missing this link. It sort of sounds a little bit suspiciously like this climate scientists fabricate climate change, like.
No, you're right.
So I think that to me it seems as though climate scientists would have a lot larger stake in prolonging the research dollars if they were to say that there was not any consensus. We need more money for climate science research.
Well, actually, so if you just track the history of like investment in climate research, it's skyrocketed over the last 30 years. So that's just misinformed. But I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't think there are lots of people sitting around that have committed some massive skill. I think there are certain academics that have conspired, and I think some of his friends have, But I think that there's a much broader issue at stake. There's a great book called Taken by Storm by some of his colleagues that he would not agree with, McKittrick and Essex. And it talks about how there is no global climate conspiracy. There's pressures on a lot of different groups. There's pressures on scientists to come up with certainty that they don't have. There's pressure on the media to report certainty that's not there. And there's pressure on politicians to act on the certainty that we just create. So no, I don't think there are like evil people sitting around in a room scheming to come up with a global warming hoax. I think it's something that happened. I think it's a very interesting sociological phenomenon, how people got such like wrong ideas and spread them so effectively. But I don't think there's a conspiracy. I think that there's lots of, not conspiring, but coincidental pressures that kind of came together and created this storm of the global warming hoax.
Couldn't it potentially be more likely that, in fact, the theories were real? So rather than sort of this elaborate theory to explain, this incredible sociological phenomenon, which scientists all around the world decided that we're going to just fabricate this theory that potentially it might just be a theory that was actually correct?
Yeah, well, I mean, so, for example, I was reading his...
wouldn't that be sort of the Occam's razor answer?
Climate science no longer uses the Occam's razor, because we are committed to proving that there is some sort of massive climate change that human beings are causing, and for 30 years we haven't used Occam's razor. We've come up with ways to interpret the data to say that climate change is happening. For example, some of you may have read the article I wrote about methane and carbon dioxide and temperature over the last 600,000 years. The original story was, look, we have this like huge chart of 600,000 years of temperature, I'm going to say lagging or leading wrong because you always say it wrong, but temperature being driven by CO2. And then we found out, no, it was actually the other way around. CO2 levels were not were lagging temperature levels. Temperature rose first. This is like the whole Milankovitch cycles thing. And then, of course, the theory was modified to include feedback. No one has answered what is the end of feedback, how does that work? But there's always been this constant motivation to come up with a theory that is not necessarily simple, but rather achieves their political goals.
Okay, so thank you guys. I just want to say thank you for everyone who stayed through this a little bit of extended debate. Thank you guys so much for coming, and a big round of applause to everybody who spoke here. I know a lot of you didn't answer, and I'm sure you guys have tons more things to say, so feel free to stick around and ask them anything you want. I'm sure some of them have to run, but I'm sure some of them would love to talk to you.
Good job, guys.
Yeah, there you go.
Thanks for coming.
Hey, Rafshan, Julian.
Kimball.